Welcome to Collegial Conversations with Diana Clark, the professional webinar series that offers clinical and personal perspectives on issues that are common, but often not talked about. Here is today's Collegial Conversation.
Thank you for joining a Collegial Conversation with Diana Clark. Today, joining Diana is Lisa Arnold, Psychotherapist and Clinical Director of the Collegiate Recovery Program at Fairfield University. Lisa is a member of the AOD Advisory Board and Opioid Awareness Task Force, which brings several events onto the campus throughout the year to promote awareness, reduce the stigma of addiction, and is responsible for providing Narcan training to faculty and staff. Lisa has 25 years of experience working with addiction and recovery in various settings, including rehabilitation and higher education. Lisa is joining Diana Clark to share more on the Collegiate Recovery Program at Fairfield University and how this program establishes a substance-free environment and promotes healing and recovery for students. Thank you so much for joining today, Lisa. I am now going to pass the conversation over to Diana.
Thank you, Laura. Hey, Lisa, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Diana. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So before we dive into what's going on at Fairfield in specific, let's broaden the subject to the collegiate recovery movement in general, if you wouldn't mind. 20 years ago, I can speak back even further than that, the option of going back on a college campus post treatment for 28 days did not seem realistic to me. It just didn't. Collegiate recovery has changed that in large part due to people like you. So let's talk about the collegiate recovery movement in general.
Yeah, so thank you, Diana. I feel like the collegiate recovery movement probably originated with the Association of Recovery in Higher Education, which was an organization that kind of was very successful in pulling together schools that were interested in creating collegiate recovery communities as well as collegiate recovery programs. And there were variations of that on college campuses. For instance, back in 2012, we started with a recovery lounge, which was simply one room, safe space, water cooler, and coffee maker. It kind of resembled an AA meeting where students could go and feel supported in their sober journeys. A collegiate recovery program, by definition, can just simply be that, all the way to what we've created today, and everything in between. There's a continuum of what different schools have to offer in terms of sober support.
So you spoke to one end, which is the coffee pot and the lounge, and sober dorms, would that be in there too? Because those aren't necessarily recovery, but they are a recognition that there are people who want to not be imbibing, right?
For sure. So our university has what's called a wellness floor. They're not called, it's loosely called a sober floor because typically on a wellness floor or a sober floor would be a student who wants to live a healthier lifestyle. They might not rule out the use of substances, but they can't use them on that floor. Or they can't smoke marijuana on that floor. They might do it in other places. So it's not the kind of commitment that people make when they come out of a treatment program and they want to live a sober life in recovery.
Got it. Okay. So that on one end of the continuum is the coffee pot and the lounge. What does the other end of that continuum look like?
I'm glad you asked because over the past, we are going into it is 2012, 9th year of collegiate recovery with all of the components that we've created along the way. And you've seen them because you were a guest speaker in our home.
Yeah.
So that includes the housing component, which is a CAPE, which is diagonally across from one of the entrances of the school, where students actually reside in a separate place from I call them traditional students we call it across the street in the residence halls. So They have separate sober living and a recovery community. We have a house manager who lives on site, who's available to them 24/7, has a separate apartment over the garage but it's very conducive to recovery living because he has another open bedroom door that goes out to where all the other bedrooms are. And so he provides recreational opportunities. He does the house meeting every single week where the residents reside. They decide what kinds of programming they want. And he provides also random drug screenings in the form of breathalyzers and saliva tests. We also have the spiritual component which really separates us from a sober house versus a recovery house, because a recovery community, residents go to meetings together. You know, they get their sponsorship through their meetings. They go to the diner afterward, or they might have mini meetings where they're working on their step work within the house, right? So they have that spiritual piece where they're all required to do a set number of meetings. But in the spirit of multiple pathways of recovery, it might not be AA that they choose.
Right.
It might be refuge recovery. It might be smart recovery. It might be some other religious form of spirituality that they pick up along the way. That's something bigger than themselves, right? The recreational piece provides opportunities for them to engage in sober fun with each other. Every month they choose a big activity. They might go to Killington. They go jet skiing. They have their ski weekends. And 2 weeks ago, they just got back from spring break where they all engaged in a week-long service work project for Habitat for Humanity down in North Carolina. So they built houses for a week during their spring break, which was some really nice service work that they did. And lastly, there is the clinical piece, which is group therapy, which I come into the house on a weekly basis and provide group therapy for pretty much all of the residents and anyone who's interested in being sober that day on campus. And they're all required to have individual private therapists and or recovery coaches.
Got it. So you're dealing with housing, recovery, wellness as one bucket, and then the clinical piece. That's great. That's great. Is there, and you knew I had to ask this, is there a family component, or is that not appropriate at a college level?
So you saw a lot of our family component where I think in the beginning where we have a student who comes in from either an extended care facility or rehab, we acknowledge that there's a big difference between coming to college and living in a recovery house versus all of those components where the family might be more enmeshed in the treatment process.
Correct.
So we establish healthy boundaries with the family. I sit down with them at the beginning of the academic year. We review the housing contract, all of the guidelines of being in the recovery house and what will be expected. And then we have our open house, which is move-in weekend, where we have a speaker like yourself, and we have a barbecue, and the parents can help move in and walk around and kind of see the premises and get comfortable with where their student is living. And then after that, there isn't too much more.
Bye-bye, Mom. Bye-bye, Dad. We're doing testing. We're monitoring. We've got this.
Yes.
We've got this.
I mean, essentially, I have them sign a release of information for emergency purposes only. They're all over the age of 18. They're adults, and we treat them like that. So unless something pops up during the academic year where we have to connect with a parent, I certainly don't hesitate to do that. But it's often not needed at this level.
Got it. Got it. So next question, what happens if somebody is unsuccessful in a recovery community such as yours? What happens?
In what sense?
Let's say they drink or smoke weed and the tests reflect that.
Right. So what's interesting about a relapse or a slip within our recovery program, because we're very much like family, is that we often find out before the drug screen happens. They're talking to each other. There's a mood change. We see something, right? Radar. So we'll have a conversation. They come into my office. And oftentimes our house manager will have to search the premises, have to search the bedroom, make sure that there's no contraband, any unsafe, we're very mindful of the other residents in the house and any substances that could be left behind or hidden somewhere on the premises. So then I'll have a conversation with the student and really talk about their level of motivation for returning to the house and what that's going to take, right? So that could be a number of things. And I think we really pride ourselves on an individual case-by-case basis. Some students are extremely remorseful. They want to get back into the house. The immediacy of the issue typically is to remove them from the house for a minimum of 3 days to a week, depending on recalibration, getting the mood-altering substance out of their system, getting parents on board.
Where did they go? Where do they go? Yeah.
So there's been a combination of things. We could find them housing on campus. They've gone home with a parent. A parent has come up to the house and lived in a hotel room with them for a couple of days. The student health center might be involved. We find alternative housing solutions for that period of time. And within that period of time, we make a decision about kind of looking at what a new treatment plan would be. And oftentimes that's a new level of care. And while they might be able to stay in the house or return to the house, it might require a round of IOP. It might require a 90 and 90. It might mean daily breathalyzers and meeting with me every other day. And we come up with that as we go, depending on where that student's at, what the relapse looks like, and what their motivation is to get back to a good spot.
That's great. That's great, because it should be flexible. Not every incident is the same as every other incident.
Correct.
I love to hear that people are talking to each other. How many people are in the residence?
So we hold a maximum within that cape of 5 beds. And then the house next door also has 5 beds, but depending on how many people we have in the program at the time, right now we only have 1 house. But I'm interviewing, we're in full interview process for the fall to refill beds. We're going to have every year, if someone graduates, we have a big graduation party, and it kind of provides closure to everyone. We invite the families, and then if we do have a graduate from the program, we're eager to fill that bed with a new student who's in recovery.
Do people stay multiple years?
Yes, it's completely on a voluntary basis. You know, going back to what happens after a relapse, some students, and there are some circumstances where a student might say, look, this is not the life I want. And I say it's unfair to you to have to adhere to guidelines and expectations to live in a recovery house if you don't feel that recovery is within the trajectory of your college experience, and they move out. But it's a voluntary experience. We've had some students stay the whole 4 years. We've had other students that are transfer students who maybe only needed 2 years left of college and then remain until they graduate.
So back to your other passion, which is, you know, prevention and addressing opioid overdose and addiction. I just want to talk about fentanyl strips just for a minute. Are they available? Who do you recommend owns them, has them on hand, and when are they helpful?
So I think they're always helpful. And I think the mindset for fentanyl strips are you have to be in a place where you understand harm reduction as opposed to
Abstinence.
As opposed to abstinence. And that idea that if we are to have fentanyl strips available, that doesn't mean we condone drug use. It means we condone safe drug use, right? So we're not there yet as a Jesuit university. Within the Association of Recovery in Higher Education, there are many schools that have fentanyl strips available within the student health center. And that is, you know, it took us many years, Diana, to get even Narcan, right? And so there's this, it's a process. And some schools still don't have Narcan. I'm very proud that all of our public safety officers carry Narcan, as well as our student health center, and it's available in our recovery house. And it's like every time there's something new out there, there's this, you know, resistance.
Talking about fentanyl strips, it doesn't seem to me that we are in fact condoning use. We're just recognizing there is use and that use can be lethal. It is a reminder that every time somebody takes a pill, every time somebody puts something up their nose, every time,
yes,
there is a danger.
Every time. Yep, and we are right next door to some of our inner city, where there's quite a bit of drug use. There's a lot of fentanyl, and Sacred Heart University is grappling with the same issue. Is that our students are not necessarily street smart, and they are willing to take something if they're under the influence. We're having this conversation with a student who's clean, who's sober in that moment, and it's very place-based motivation. Yes, I understand I'm not going to take a substance that I don't know where it came from or test it first. But in that moment, under the influence, there's a different feeling about that. And there's a different, there's lack of better judgment.
Correct.
And that's my biggest fear.
Yeah, mine too. I live with that fear. I have a college age student, and I love the idea that fentanyl strips, I wish they were on every street corner.
Yep.
It's reality.
Simple as that.
Thank you, Lisa Arnold, coming today and talking with us about collegiate recovery, and in particular, your wonderful program that seems to embody most of the elements.
Thank you for joining this webinar. Tune in to more webinars and sign up for our newsletter at o'connorpg.com.